Hi, this is a remote lesson for GCSE English on Paper 2 Non-Fiction. I'm Eleanor, one of the English teachers at the college, and this session is designed to take about an hour and a half for you to complete, the same amount of time that you would be in a face-to-face lesson at college. So always in these remote sessions, you're going to have a SPAG activity to start with. So on the right hand side of the page here, you need to ask yourself here whether both sides of those sentences make sense. This SPAG activity is focused on commas and whether you're using commas correctly or whether you're splicing two complete sentences together with a comma that's not being used effectively or correctly. So if you look at those three sentences there, ask yourself, do both sides make sense on their own? And if they do, then that shouldn't be a comma. It should be, you've got a choice in that case. You could either have a full stop and a new sentence, or you could use a dash to sort of informally link those two clauses, or you could also use a connective like and or but to link those together. So you've got three examples on the right hand side. My father is a referee. He also plays for the local football team. Hopefully you can hear or see in that one that both the sides do make complete sense. So you could have those as separate sentences. They definitely don't need a comma between them. And similarly, the third sentence, GCSE exams are increasingly taken by adults. That could be a full stop. Most schools offer evening classes. But in that case, you could put a connective in the middle like but, and, so, which would effectively link those two clauses together. The one in the middle, because the first clause in that sentence is dependent, it doesn't make sense by itself. When Sharon sold her artwork on eBay, that doesn't make sense by itself. It needs the other part of the sentence. It relies on that other part to make sense. So in that case, the comma is fine. That's being used to separate the subordinate clause, the first one, from the main clause of the sentence, which comes second. Okay, so that first SPAG activity there is just a reminder, a really common error that GCSE students make, and a way that you might lose marks for your SPAG in the exam is by comma splicing, which just means putting commas where they don't need to be. So have a look back over those, see if you can rewrite the top one and the bottom one with one of those options. So either full stop, new sentence, a dash instead of the comma, or put in a connective. So this session is going to focus on effective writing techniques that you can use in Paper 2 transactional writing. So whether you're writing a speech or a letter or a review, any of those non-fiction forms, these techniques, you should be able to mix and match and pick and select which techniques work best for the question. So in terms of knowledge, skills and behaviour, hopefully you're going to approach this positively, aim to get as much out of it as you can, aim high, and you're going to be proactive to take the chances during this session to complete the tasks which you will submit to your teacher. So in terms of submitting work for this session, these remote sessions that you have at home, this is still treated exactly the same way as a face-to-face session. You need to submit work so that your teacher can give you feedback, and so that your learning can be sequenced properly, so that what you learn here is going to feed into what you do later in the course. So whilst you're watching this session, it would be ideal if you could create a Word document with your responses for tasks A, B, C and D, which are going to come later in this session. If you're watching this on your phone or you don't have Word, that's absolutely fine. You could do the tasks on paper and send a photo to your teacher. You might upload it onto Teams. They might ask you to email it to them. They might ask you to bring it physically to the next session, but your teacher needs to see what you've been doing so that they can help you to make more progress. So the big picture, why are we doing this particular session as home learning? Paper 2 non-fiction is worth a big chunk of your marks at GCSE. It's worth 60% of your final qualification, and the writing section is a big chunk of that. It's worth 40 marks. And these writing techniques that we're going to look at today can be applied to any task. So a lot of these you'll be familiar with from previous study. But if you can get the hang of using these techniques and become more confident in selecting which ones suit the task, then this will really set you up for this very important and sort of lucrative part of the course. So 3 objectives here. First, we looked at a SPAG focus, which was comma splicing. You identified and fixed the errors. Our next objective is I want to help you to build an effective toolkit of writing techniques that you can apply to the question that you select from the exam for paper 2. And not just build a toolkit, I want you to practice using them during this session, but not just using them randomly and following a sort of ready-made list that you're going to use in whatever order, having a pre-prepared set of writing techniques. This session is to help you practice selecting them to suit the task, the audience and the purpose. So you're picking the right techniques to suit the effect that you want to create in that task. In the rest of the notes that you take for this session, your teacher may have been through this already with you, but on the right hand side here you can see the format of a way of taking notes, which is called Cornell notes. It looks a bit fancy, but all it really is you split your page where you're taking notes into 3 sections. So the wide right hand section is where you just make consistent notes as to what's happening in the session, what information you're being given. Hopefully you'll be able to put that in bullet point form. You don't need to write down every word, but putting down the important things. On the left, where the margin would be, is space for you to give yourself prompts or clarifications or ask questions or note things down, anything that you don't understand that you want to come back to. So this is encouraging you to sort of reflect as the session's going on about what you're getting and what you're less sure of, so that you're actively invested in what you're learning and you're taking a really active role in it, and you're thinking through what you're getting, what you want clarification on, and during the session some of those questions might be answered, but if they're not, at the bottom here, your final section of making notes is a summary. So you would evaluate what you've got out of the session, what you feel like you've done well, what you feel like you need more practice on, just to help you be more of a reflective learner, so that you're being proactive rather than waiting for feedback and being told that you need to work on one thing. The point of these Cornell notes is to make you more proactive, more able to take the initiative yourself and think, what I really need to work on to get my grade 4 is this or that. So this session's focusing on writing techniques, and these 2 acronyms here are ways that you might have been taught previously to recall and remember the writing techniques that your teacher wanted you to use. So these are really useful because in a high pressure situation like in an exam, it's really easy to lose your train of thought or just get really stressed and forget what it was that you wanted to include. So having a prompt like this, you might have called it a forest, a da forest, persuader. Your teacher might have had a completely different one that I've never heard of. Can be a really useful way for you to remember to include these things in your exam response. The only danger of this is that it can make your writing quite formulaic and robotic, and that you're not really thinking about what you're writing. You're just putting in some alliteration because you knew that you had to do that. And what you sometimes get is people pre-planning the examples that they're going to use. So pre-planning an example of a statistic or a rule of 3 or alliteration, putting in slippery snakes just because it's alliteration isn't going to get you a grade 4, because it doesn't show that you've really thought about the effect that would have on the reader, on your audience. So whilst these acronyms here are really helpful just as a general reminder to use these techniques and to know what these techniques mean. You need to put more thought into why you're using them and make them suit the nature of the task that you're actually given in the exam. So at this point in this session, my hyperlinks won't come up here while I'm talking. So if you just pause this video and then hover over this so that you can watch this short speech from Pirates of the Caribbean. This is just a short speech, but it uses lots and lots of persuasive techniques, which I've highlighted in different colours. And the important thing here is that it doesn't use all of the techniques in Da Forest. It doesn't use all of them in Persuader, because then they wouldn't necessarily all be appropriate. In this speech, the character is making a speech to a group of pirates on a ship, so it wouldn't make sense for her to start using statistics, because that wouldn't be relevant to them. It wouldn't be something that her intended audience would understand. So the best sort of transactional writing is where the writer considers the effect that the techniques are going to have on the audience or the reader. So just pause it a sec, watch that speech. It only lasts, I think it's like 3 or 4 minutes, and then just pop back so that you can see what we're saying about the effect of these techniques. So hopefully you've had a chance to watch that speech in action, so it brings it to life a little bit more. Now have a think about what these colours might mean. So here in red, she's asking a question which doesn't need a response. She's just asking it to make the listeners think for themselves about their own sense of what's important. So we would call that a rhetorical question. If you look through the rest and just have a think if there are any that you recognise. On the next slide, I'm just going to run through those quickly, and you can click back if you need to look at what they are, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, that we understand what all those terms mean. So red is a rhetorical question, one that doesn't need a response. It's a question that's posed to make the listener or the reader think for themselves. Repetition is used quite heavily in that speech to really drill down into a point and make the listener really understand its importance. Emotive language. So in the example, I think she refers to them as frightened bilge rats aboard a derelict ship. So when a writer uses emotive language like frightened and derelict, it makes the situation there, in that case, seem more grave, and we sort of pity those people because they seem helpless and pathetic. So, similarly with sensory language, so the sensory language that she uses, she talks about what they'll hear. They will hear the ring of our swords. So it makes it seem more immediate, and it makes it seem more that it's affecting the people that she's talking to more. It's not just what they can see, it's also seeping into all their senses, into what they can hear, into what they can feel. So it's emphasising the power of her argument. The triplet at the end is quite effective because it's really well balanced in this example. So the sort of succession of nouns, we've got abstract nouns like strength and courage. So those are things, but not things that we can see. And then we've got concrete nouns and things that can be seen. So like brows, backs, hearts. These are all things that that exist, that you could see. So by the sweat of our brows and the strength of our backs and the courage of our hearts. So the rhythm of that we've got two nouns sort of side by side in each of those 3 examples, it really creates like a strong rhythm that builds and makes her argument seem more powerful. There's alliteration in the extract. She says, we've got quite a lot of F alliteration, so free, freedom, flash, frightened. So by using those sounds in that example, it's not just any alliteration for the sake of it. Remember that in this example it's aboard a ship, isn't it? So maybe the sounds are to sort of echo the sound of the wind and make the situation seem more heightened, that it seems more urgent, that you can hear the wind whistling past them. So the writer who's created this speech is using the F quite softly, so it's not a hard sound that's being repeated, it's quite soft and chilling, so maybe to make the pirates in that example seem afraid, that they're quiet and afraid of what's to come. Two of these here you might not be as familiar with, so modal verb and imperative. Those two examples we're going to have a look at on the next slides, because these are really useful persuasive techniques that you could add to your toolkit. Whether or not you've used something like Daft Forest before, these are extra techniques that you could add in to your whole selection that you've got to choose from in the exam, so that you can make sure you pick the right techniques to fit the task. So here, this is task A on the Word document or the paper-based version that you're doing. So modal verbs are little extra words that go in sentences that give an impression of the sort of urgency or how powerful the person feels about what needs to happen. So if you think of the difference between saying you must hand your home learning into your teacher as opposed to you could, it has a really different effect, doesn't it? Could seems like it's completely optional, that you can do it but you don't have to, whereas must seems like you're obliged to do it, you have to, it's something that isn't an option. So if you just list those 8 words from strongest to weakest, which ones would you say are persuasive? And any persuasive modal verbs that you identify, try and start putting them in your writing. Secondly, can you write 2 sentences to add to the speech that we looked at from Pirates of the Caribbean, that you could add to that speech that use persuasive modal verbs? So just pause the video here and complete that task. I've put 10 minutes, but I don't think it will take you that long. Just listing the words and then writing 2 sentences for the Pirates of the Caribbean speech. Okay, hopefully you've managed to complete that task. So the next one is imperatives, and this is another really useful technique that you can incorporate into your persuasive or argumentative writing. Imperatives are any sentence that is a command that gives an order, and the way that you can identify these or use them is that they have to start with a verb. So loads of these are sort of instructions that you would hear from a teacher or like a parent or a guardian, someone that was giving you an order of something that you have to do. Shut the door, close the window, take the dog out, water the garden, move the car, anything that's giving a direct instruction. So again, I've given you 10 minutes, but I don't think it will take you that long. Have a go at just writing 5 of your own examples of imperatives to add to the Pirates of the Caribbean speech. Okay, so hopefully you've been able to practice using some imperatives. Your next task is just to run through all of those techniques and just create a sort of definition for yourself of how it's persuasive in that example. Just think about the effect of each of those. I've put the colours on just in case you need to go back to the extract, the Pirates of the Caribbean text, to remember the effect of it. So pause your video there and spend 15 minutes just going over those techniques that we looked at in that speech. So from what we've looked at here today, I want you to just do yourself a mind map of how many techniques you can remember. So give yourself like 2 minutes and challenge yourself to how many you can remember. So if you're used to using an acronym like DeForest or Persuader, then think through those, but also add any of the additional techniques that we've talked about in this session around your mind map. And just try and spend that full amount of time writing and getting as many different techniques as you can down on paper, so that you've got a full toolkit to pick from to make sure that you pick the right techniques to go with the effect that you're trying to create. So your last task using that toolkit that you created before, your last task is to have a go at this exam style response. So you're going to spend 25 minutes writing this. It's really useful in sessions if you can get into the habit of doing an extended piece of writing regularly, because in the exam you're going to have to write for quite a long period of time, so you need to give your hand and your mind time to sort of really practice what that experience is like. If you never challenge yourself to write for more than like 10 or 15 minutes, it's going to come as a shock when you get nearer to the exam. So this task here, write the text for a speech to deliver to young people to encourage them to get involved in volunteering within their community. So think about who your audience is. It's for young people. So think about what sort of language would be appropriate to appeal to them. It's meant to be a speech, so have a think about the conventions of a speech. How would you start it? How are you going to make sure that the examiner knows that you're writing a speech and not a letter? So what are you going to do to make it seem like a speech? And then in terms of the purpose, you're trying to encourage them. You're not forcing them. You're trying to appeal to them to make them make that choice themselves. So think about which techniques are going to be useful. Perhaps in this example, imperatives might not be that useful because they might sound a bit bossy. If you're just trying to encourage people to get involved, you might want to go for slightly softer modal verbs. You might want to use techniques that are sort of encouraging them to make their own decision rather than forcing them. So pause the video and spend 25 minutes writing that task. Here's the mark scheme that you'll face for all of these writing questions in section B of paper 2. So to get to that magic grade 4, you need to be aiming for the middle of the mark scheme as a minimum. So have a look at the words that are here. On the left-hand side, the part of the mark scheme is for your ideas and the way that you structure and the techniques that you use. The right-hand side is the SPAG mark that you have out of 16. So notice that the wording here, to be in level 3, so about half marks, you need to select devices to suit the audience and purpose. So notice that word select. It doesn't just say work your way down to forest and put those things in order no matter what the question is. You have to put some thought into it and really think about the effect that those techniques are going to have and the sort of register that you want to create to connect with your audience. If you just have a look on the SPAG side as well, to be sort of getting towards half marks, it says that you need to use punctuation with control. So that really links back to what we did right at the start with those comma splice examples. If you're regularly comma splicing, so using commas where they don't belong, then that's not having control over your sentences and punctuation. So remember the options that you had. If both sides make sense independently, you want to either put a full stop in a new sentence or a dash or use a connective, but any of those ways are going to give you a lot more control over your sentences. So finally here, hopefully you made notes today using this Cornell format. Now have a look at the bottom section. So summarise what you've learnt. What strengths do you think you've shown in this session and what have you found hard? If you're able to make a note of that in there, this is really going to help you for the next face-to-face session that you have with your regular tutor, because then you're already proactively taking responsibility for what you need to work on more, and you'll be able to address any misconceptions or get clarification on anything that you need from them at that point. So just as a reminder, as we reach the end of our session, you need to hand in your work for tasks A, B, C and D to your regular normal English teacher as evidence of your participation in this remote learning, and so that you can get feedback on those tasks. So hopefully you've got something out of this session and you'll be able to take this into what you do next week or next session when you're face to face.